Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel and more Pillage here as we wrap up the faction coverage for the Fall of Rome expansion, and that is going to be today with the Picts. So jumping in, let's take a look at what we get for special rules, talents, any kind of gear, things like that, and then we'll jump into the list itself and see how it stacks up with some of these unique lists, but also very powerful lists that we've been covering now in the Fall of Rome expansion. So let's see what the Picts actually can offer us. As far as equipment goes, Javelin Masters. So they ignore the long range penalty when shooting with javelins. Well, that's fantastic. So good deal there. So it gets a little bit more value out of having those javelins. And usually those tend to be on the cheap end for points. So you could expect that to be probably spammed with this list. We'll see if that idea holds up. Castrum Raiders. So when Picts raid Roman forts, they take everything: shields, helmets, chainmail, and Roman weapons. So for each chieftain in your army, 2 of your warriors can be equipped with chainmail for free. So that's kind of the first little instance we've seen of that, where we kind of get like an unlockable ability in the sense of, if you do this, then you get some of that with the game so far. So that's really cool. So an incentive there certainly to take I guess additional chieftains just to get some free gear, because especially on these like more lower tech or less developed factions in that sense, some of the higher end gear tends to be very expensive. So getting something like that for free, albeit at the cost of another chieftain, is pretty cool. So moving on, war tattoos. So they send warriors into battle with heightened courage. That makes sense. So they can reroll a failed morale check. Pretty cool. Highland guerrillas. When they deploy in craggy areas, Picts are formidable foes. So they can't be targeted by shooting attacks while within an area of rocky ground. So again, it's going to be very important in your games, depending on terrain, because everyone's going to have different terrain available. Always important to define what terrain counts as what, so that there's no disagreements or anything like that. But that makes them pretty powerful from an ambushing perspective. One of the other factions had something about like hiding in like swamps or something like that too. So that was just another cool terrain ability here. Finally, then, in addition, Picts ignore the difficult terrain penalty for moving through rocky areas or difficult terrain. Makes sense. They're already adept at ambushing from that, so they should also be able to move freely through that. So again, having a table with a lot of that kind of terrain is obviously going to suit them and make them really formidable in that. That being said, obviously, like, unless you're really planning a certain themed board, your whole table is probably not going to contain that type of terrain. So I guess if they're really focusing on maximizing that, if the scenario allows, right, you could also just kind of ignore them. If they want to stay hiding in the rocky terrain, then go focus on another area of the battlefield where maybe they just aren't there or can't really reach you, but also still important as far as the scenario goes, or just finding different ways to mitigate their advantage there. But nonetheless, cool stuff. So again, terrain specific, love that. Talents, we get 2 here. So War Cry, 40, so fairly expensive. It's a 1 use though. At the start of a melee phase, they all gain a +1 bonus to their rolls to hit, but take a -1 bonus to their defense rolls. But most of them probably aren't going to have that much armor, so not necessarily that shaky of an ability here. Trade-off, certainly, right? We obviously don't want to make ourselves more vulnerable, but then again, if we can get more hits, hopefully we'll cause more casualties, and therefore, if the enemy is dead, then they can't swing back at us, right? Assuming we're going first and stuff like that. So all in all, pretty good stuff. But again, once per game here, so you just got to be very careful of when you're going to employ that, right? But usually there is always that crucial turn of the battle, kind of a make it or break it moment. So that's obviously the time to unleash. Finally, a cheaper one, Scout, for just 20. After both armies have deployed, choose a figure from among your troops to be your scout. You can deploy it anywhere on the battlefield, more than 15 away from an enemy deployment area. Seems a little bit gimmicky and not necessarily all that effective right off the bat, but maybe in certain scenarios where you need to get to certain objectives a little bit faster, or loot or whatever it might be. Maybe it's one of the rescue scenarios, right? Just being able to start closer, assuming that the enemy isn't positioned likewise. 15 inches is still a fair bit as far as the game goes, generally on a smaller table. But nonetheless, I mean, that could certainly work its way into certain, I keep using that word too much, some of the specific scenarios that could have a use, although 20 for that, again, just seems situational, but and it's just the one figure as well. So that's a lot when you're already paying for, probably a premium here when we get to the list on just a lot of better equipped guys and stuff like that. But we'll just have to see. So love the first one, Warcry. That can be huge, right? That can create a big swing in the game. Probably well worth its points. But the Scout one, we'll have to see. Anyway, let's get on to the list, guys. So they also ignore the effects of heavy rain and fog, which, in a scenario with weather, but then also with their specialty in that craggy terrain, that can actually be absolutely brutal, right? That's where, again, important to define what terrain is what, but if you have the weather coming into play also with those terrain types, and if that kind of terrain is spread out across the battlefield and they can get into that can be absolutely brutal, right? That is, there are some factions that ignore different types of weather and stuff too, but the fact that they can ignore heavy rain and fog, set up in that terrain and just be better at it, right? And you're dealing with the weather, you're dealing with the terrain, and they can ignore both of those things. That could be huge in the right setup. All right, on to the list. So no supply wagon for these guys. They do have access to a healer for 25 gold, and very cheap here, right? The 10-point warrior, chieftain at 30. I think some of the factions had them a little bit more expensive, without pulling up all of them as a comparison right now. But so good stuff there. Unarmored is of course free. Now, interestingly, the regular warriors just don't even get access to armor, except as we saw with the Raider's ability. So for each chieftain, 2 warriors can get chainmail for free. So basically, 2 warriors will get armor for free. So if you think about it, your 30-point chieftain is providing another technically 60 points of free gear, if we're reading that correctly, to your guys. So that's actually pretty damn good, right? If you think about 60 gold, it technically would be just 10 basic warriors with no gear. Or sorry, not 10 warriors, but 6 warriors with basic gear. So that's pretty powerful. Shields are super cheap, right? So definitely, you got to get something, I think, for your warriors if they're going to be more in hand-to-hand. So yeah, the shield is definitely going to be imperative there. Thankfully, it's just the 5, right? It's not hard to build a shield regardless of your level of civilization and development, so that makes sense. Again, improvised weapons are also free. Oh my, free spears. Starting to see where the faction's coming together here. We haven't seen a lot of other things be free aside from the, obviously no armor, so there's nothing to pay for, and the improvised weapon, but free spears, that is very spicy. Wow. So we can give, with the chieftain bonus, we can have 2 warriors, got to pay the 20 points, 2 sets of chainmail for free, spend 10 points more on the shield, so we're at 10, 20, 30, and they can both have spears. That's pretty damn cool. For other guys, yep, as we kind of figured, though, hand weapons are going to be at a premium, 20, compared to I think the normal 10 for most factions, right? So we're paying double for that. No Kantos, obviously, makes sense. They get cheap slings, very cheap javelins, as we suspected with the Javelin Masters rule and everything too. And again, it's just building a shorter spear you can throw. So again, makes sense on the tech side. So yeah, so expect a lot of just harassing, spammy kind of missile fire with these guys. You can just take a basic warrior, throw them a javelin. If you feel that they need a shield, great. And hey, they get a free spear on top of things, right? Going to pay a premium for bows, though, if you want that long-range firepower. Again, I think just the basic warrior, no armor, and the bow is going to be pretty neat if we can get them into those craggy areas, like the rocky ground, right? That can be nasty, especially with the weather playing an effect, if that's in the scenario, right? So you imagine you got some of your archers set up in rocky terrain. It's wet. Let's say we got rain and fog or some combination of that. The enemy trying to shoot you is going to have a very bad time, really almost a waste of time to try and go at you that way. So actually they can be, what am I saying? Just rereading the rule, right? They can't be targeted by shooting attacks when they're in there. So they are basically untouchable via shooting, so they can just continue to shoot you until you make it to them. And once you get close, they can disperse and go elsewhere. So they can really just absolutely brutalize that and make it tough. So where, if you're going to include rocky terrain on your tables, and you know that like somebody might be playing Picts, it's going to be very crucial on where that's put. If they get to that and can get set up with a decent amount of like bowmen or something like that, or anybody else trying to approach it, even the slingers or something, that's going to be just a kind of pain in the ass to deal with them. They could even set up like a little horde of regular warriors. You can't shoot them, so you're gonna have to go fight them. And if they're kind of taking prime real estate on a terrain board, right, where they can kind of dominate where you might go, that's nastiness. No plumbadas, that makes sense. What they do kind of get, or don't get rather, no access to horses. That was almost going to be a given, right? So that makes sense. No banner either, so they haven't figured out how to make a flag. They do get the war horn though, which again will be useful for morale purposes and all that. 30 gold against a chunk to invest, but we're getting a lot of other cheap things and discounts here, so why not? And interestingly, no rules or anything for that, but they do also have the warhound, so let's not discount what the warhounds can bring to us in the game. But as far as what this faction does, again, I'm just seeing it here, right? We're gonna have cheap slingers and javelins. They don't really need much else. And then they're going to be there to do their thing. I think a decent little selection of bowmen, maybe like 3 or something like that, in 3 or 4 if we can afford it, depending on the size of the game, and getting them like in against some like rocky terrain would be absolutely brutal. Or just on elevated ground a little bit further out, very nasty. But then the bread and butter for their fighting is, I think, going to be taking advantage of the free chainmail per chieftain. So we get a little bit of heavy armor essentially sprinkled in there. Certainly, I think it makes sense to pay for the chieftain to be as good as he possibly can be for gear. I was going to make him a little bit more expensive, but we need the chieftains alive generally, right? Because they are just really good with their multiple hit points and all that. But I think the bulk of it's going to be these, again, cheap missile troops backed up by just a horde of cheap fighters, all essentially rocking spears, right? Why would you, you don't need a hand weapon for that many guys, just your special ones. And I think that's where maybe, you go all in and, have the chainmail guys maybe get the hand weapon. Again, that you're not paying for the chainmail, so the hand weapon, there's not that much of a tax. And obviously get the shields, keep some like good bodyguards essentially near the chieftains. But then you have just a horde of supporting guys with spears helping you out with the advantages that provides in combat. So there it is, guys, the Picts. Very interesting force to round this out. Went a little long on this one, but let us know your thoughts. Have you played the Picts in Pillage? And what have you played against, and how has that gone for you? Do you agree with kind of what we were talking about here, or have you gone a different route with how you put the list together? Let us know in the comments, like and subscribe, and we'll have more Pillage for you soon.